Welcome everybody to our 15th anniversary of the 11 Days of Global Unity. I'm Karen Palmer. I'm known as Miss Kindness and Mindful Media Mom on all social media. And I am one of your hosts here for this incredible summit. We're talking about human rights today, and this is an incredible guest that we have. But my co-host is also incredible, and he is going to be sharing a little bit about how we can get more involved and have that question, what can we do together that we can't do on our own? My co-host, Rick Ulfik, is the founder of We the World, the We campaign at we.net. Rick is the co-creator of the 11 Days of Global Unity, 11 campaigns to transform the world. A global platform to unite and amplify the efforts of people, organizations, and movements working for the common good. Participants have included Desmond Tutu, Jane Goodall, Deepak Chopra, Marianne Williamson, Bill McKibben, and many more. Welcome, Rick. Thanks for so much for creating this beautiful 15th anniversary of the 11 Days of Global Unity.
Well, thank you, Karen. It's always great to be on with you. And I'm so excited about our broadcast today. Before we continue the broadcast, I want to let people know about you, Karen. Our host is Karen Palmer, a mom who made a wish that sparked a kindness revolution. She is a global kindness leader and educator at globalkindnesstv.org. And she is a live stream and social media expert, a best-selling author, and she co-produces several popular online talk shows, including the one with We the World called the Welcome to We Show. Thank you, Karen. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We encourage you to check out all the panels of this 11 Days of Global Unity TeleSummit on the 11 campaigns for change. Together, we believe these 11 campaigns form a blueprint for global transformation. And today we will be talking about human rights with Jacqueline Murekatete. Looking at the big picture, refugees and internally displaced persons worldwide are at record levels, over 65 million people, because of wars in Syria, Yemen, Libya, and elsewhere, and because of terrorism, persecution, and other hardships. Refugees streaming into Europe and asylum seekers at the southern border of the United States have been used by some politicians to promote xenophobia, targeting immigrants and multiculturalism in general for political reasons. We have seen attempts at genocide and the suppression of human rights in Myanmar, Sudan, Tibet, China, and elsewhere. We have seen women's rights suppressed in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia. Trafficking of women and girls is a multi-billion-dollar industry globally. In the United States, over 2 million people are incarcerated, with 80,000 of them in long-term solitary confinement, which is considered torture by UN human rights standards. Too often, our society uses incarceration as a substitute for properly addressing poverty, drug addiction, and mental illness. These and other human rights abuses around the world reflect a tragic lack of consideration of human needs in our world today. To talk about human rights, human needs, and her work to end genocide, we are so excited to be joined by Jacqueline Murekatete. Jacqueline is an attorney, a survivor of the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and an internationally recognized human rights activist. She is the founder of Genocide Survivors Foundation, a New York City-based nonprofit organization whose mission is genocide prevention and human rights education and supporting survivors of genocide and other mass atrocity crimes. Welcome to the 11 Days of Global Unity TeleSummit, Jacqueline Murekatete.
Thank you so much, Rick and Karen. I'm truly honored to be with you and to be part of this summit and this campaign. So thank you for having me.
Sure. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Jacqueline
Murekatete, yes.
Murekatete. Great.
Yes, yes.
So, and it's fabulous to have you with us. We're both, Karen and I, and many others are really inspired by your work. So could you please tell us your thoughts about the big picture of human rights as I laid it out? And if you don't mind, please share your tragic experience with the Rwanda genocide that has led you to devote your life to supporting human rights worldwide and preventing genocide from ever taking place again.
Yeah. It's very difficult. Just listening to some of the statistics that you cited, some of the atrocities that are going on in various countries around the world, the gross human rights violations in Syria, Yemen, Sudan. These are just few places among many. The Ukraine genocide that is going on now in Burma. I mean, it's deeply troubling. It's deeply troubling as for me as a human being, for me as a survivor of a genocide, for me as a human rights activist, because, you know, when I went through the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, and as you know, Rick, I lost my entire family in that genocide. Within 3 months, I went from being a child with parents, with siblings, with aunts, uncles, cousins, with dreams and goals, had a life like any other 9-year-old child, goals and dreams. And that life for me was dramatically and tragically brought to an end in a matter of 100 days, which was the duration of the genocide. I went from being that happy child with goals and dreams to being an orphan of genocide who had seen the type of atrocities that no human being and certainly no child should ever have to see. And as a result of the genocide, as I mentioned, I lost my parents and all my 6 siblings, most of my extended family members. And, you know, I have been involved in this work of genocide prevention now for many years. I began this work actually in 2001. I was inspired to share my story for the first time by a Holocaust survivor who came to share his story with my classmates and I when I was a sophomore in high school. And one of the things I always say is that, you know, whether it was after the Holocaust or after Cambodia or after Rwanda, there's always this never again. Never again will allow, you know, a group of people to be discriminated against, to be prosecuted, to be murdered simply because of who they are, simply because of what they believe. And we keep saying this never again, but the fact of the matter is that this has so far been an empty promise. It's still a promise that is yet to be fulfilled. And, you know, in this day and age, when I see that some of the atrocities that you mentioned, again, among others, it troubles me. It troubles me because but it also reminds me that there is a need for each and every one of us to redouble our efforts, to triple our efforts in trying to help people understand our common humanity. That when you see people being murdered, whether it's in Burma or in Syria, that shouldn't be something that makes you not feel anything. That's something that you should realize that suffering in Syria is suffering here in the US. That until we realize our common humanity and realize that it is in our common interest to speak out when these things happen and to try to alleviate the suffering and end the injustices, until we get to that level of consciousness, then unfortunately that these things are going to continue to happen. So my work, especially given what's going on around the world right now, is just to realize that I need to do more and I need to motivate more people to get involved. And I truly believe that if each one of us can do our part, then the world will be a better place.
It's incredible. What an incredible inspiration you are, Jacqueline, to be able to come through that those atrocities and to be a lawyer. How did you end up coming over to the United States?
Yeah, so after the genocide, as I mentioned, I had lost my entire immediate family, most of my extended family, but I was very fortunate in that I had an uncle who lived here in the US. One of my mom's brothers had left Rwanda years before. And after finding out that I had survived, he decided to adopt me and bring me to this country. So I came to this country in 95 at the age of 10. I was placed where I started learning English and adjusting to a new culture. And obviously it was a very difficult period for me, the period after the genocide, just trying to process what had happened to me. But then I came to a point when I was 16 when I realized that, you know, I had a responsibility as a survivor. I had a responsibility to tell the story of what had happened to my family, what had happened to over 1 million people who were murdered in Rwanda in those 100 days. And that I had a responsibility to my fellow classmates and my generation. I had a responsibility to humanity to do the best that I could do to make sure that what happened to me is not something that will continue to happen, that what I lost and the suffering that I experienced, it was my hope, and it's still my hope, that by doing the work that I do, that I can spare another child, other human beings from having to go through what I went through. So that's kind of what has motivated me. And despite the troubling status of human rights around the world today, I think that it's very important for us not to be paralyzed. Sometimes, like, given the realities of the world and the different atrocities that some of which we mentioned, it's very easy to be paralyzed and to say, what can I do? To be overwhelmed. But like, I think if anything, this should be something that that reminds us that we need to do more. That we need to do more, that we need to recognize, as I said, that, or as Martin Luther King used to say, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And just realizing that common humanity and our interconnectedness, I think, is something that is necessary really to get us to a different way of operating and coexisting with one another.
Exactly. And, you know, of course, that's the essence of what we talk about with We the World, with the idea of we and we consciousness, where we're thinking of the good of the whole, of the common good. I'm wondering if you have connected with other survivors of the Rwandan genocide, and I think we've talked about Immaculée in the past, because you know that person, Immaculée Ilibagiza? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I know Immaculée. I know Immaculée. Yes. She lives here in New York City as well, and she's very involved in speaking out, as you know, and spreading kindness and compassion, and trying to get more people involved in advancing basic human rights for all of us.
Exactly. Well. So she is on We the World's governing board, and we've been working together for many years. You know, I met her because when she came to the United States, she got a job working as an administrative assistant to someone named Gemma Adaba, who was the UN representative of the International Trade Union Confederation, and we were working together in office before. You know, at a certain point, about a year after she and I had seen each other every day, every week, I finally, you know, I just thought to ask her, you know, you have an interesting accent. Where are you from? After about a year, and then she told me her story, and I said, "Oh my God, you have to get that message out." And so she also, like you, has felt compelled to speak about her experiences and how you can kind of transcend that experience. And and so anyway, I thought that was interesting. So you, for the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, which was just this April, you did an event at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City to commemorate that 25th anniversary, and it was called Never Again Revisited: Survivors' Lives 25 Years On and Genocide Prevention Today. Would you like to tell us about that? And it seems like you're kind of revisiting that idea of including Holocaust survivors in this message.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
She muted herself again.
You muted. Okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear you.
I think it's very important for me, and I think for other survivors of genocide and other forms of human rights violation, gross human rights violations, or mass atrocity crime, to realize, and I think a lot of us realize this, that, you know, whether you talk about the Holocaust and whether you talk about the genocide in Rwanda or Cambodia or Bosnia or the Ukraine genocide that is going on now as we speak in Burma, you find that, you know, the reason these genocides happen is the same, is a belief that a group of people, whether because of their ethnicity or their religion or other type of identity, that they don't deserve to live. It is the deprivation of the basic human rights, the right to live. And that's why I always say, for me, like, genocide is the worst crime that human beings can commit against one another, because none of us have a choice in being born, you know, Tutsis or Hutus or Jewish or, you know, Catholic or Christian. It's not a choice. And to be persecuted and certainly murdered simply because of your identity is the worst crime. And the fact that it's still happening now, you know, in this day and age, for me, it boggles my mind. I don't understand. I don't understand how we as humanity can allow something like this to continue to happen, to say never again, and it's still ever again. So one of the reasons that we titled our programming at the Museum of Jewish Heritage this April, Never Again Revisited, was precisely to say, we keep saying never again, but look, it's ever and ever again. So far, it's been ever and ever again. Not to say that there have not been any progress in terms of genocide prevention and Holocaust education. There has been, but again, when you see the current rise of extremism, of racism, of anti-Semitism, of xenophobia, even in this country, the rise of hate crimes. The other day, I was just reading an article in New York Times talking about how hate crimes here in New York City have risen. It's at a record high. And so when you see and read, you know, these things happen, you realize again that we need to do more. We cannot give up. We cannot be paralyzed by all, because I believe, you know, these atrocities are not committed by some aliens. They are committed by us as human beings, and I think it's going to take each and every one of us to prevent them. So that program really looked at how far we've come, but still how far we still need to go, given that the crime of genocide in particular is still going on, and the type of racism and hate that enables it to happen is unfortunately on the rise in this country and around the world.
Now I forgot to unmute myself. Do you, as a lawyer, do you work with people who have are suffering from human rights oppression? And how does that work? What is it like to do that? And also maybe talk about your foundation, the Genocide Survivors Foundation, and the kind of work that you do with the foundation.
Yes. So as a lawyer and as certainly as the founder of Genocide Survivors Foundation, we certainly work with survivors of genocide and other mass atrocity crimes. And for me, it's very important, as you were saying, Rick, it's very important for me to connect with other survivors, not only survivors from Rwanda, but survivors of the Holocaust, survivors from Cambodia, survivors of Bosnia. I'm currently working with an organization that's trying to a number of organizations actually that are working hard to bring the genocide that is going on now against the Rohingya people in Burma to an end. So it's very important for me, for my work, not only to focus on what happened in Rwanda in 1994, but about the crime of genocide generally. And I think that when you look at the history of genocide or other human rights atrocities, you realize that it's happened to different groups of people and to different countries. So it's very important for us to have that network of survivors that can speak about the common humanity, the fact helping people to realize that irrespective of who you are, whether you are white or black or Catholic or Jewish, irrespective of who you are, this is something that should concern you, because something that can happen to anyone given the right conditions. So part of the message that we try to spread at Genocide Survivors Foundation is that all of us need to have an interest, recognize our interest, an existing interest in genocide prevention, because it's something that can happen even in our own country, given the right conditions, as history has proven. And also helping people to recognize, as I said before, that when they see genocide going on, whether it's in Rwanda or it's in Burma, it should be something that concerns them. That indifference, as Elie Wiesel used to say, indifference to evil is evil. That we need to get to a level of consciousness where we recognize that it's our responsibility to speak out when we see people being targeted because of who they are, because of what they believe. And it's our responsibility to do the best that we can and the resources that, use the resources that we have and work with as many people as possible to end, whatever injustice we are that is brought to our attention. So really, again, I think at the end of the day, that's why I really like the work that you do with the world, helping people to go from the I, right? The shift from I to we. At the end of the day, until we recognize that we are our fate, our interconnectedness and our interdependence, and that our fate, whether good or bad, is interconnected. So that when we ignore suffering going on, in Syria or in Sudan or in another country, it rubs off a little bit of our own humanity. I always like. I know you've done a lot of work also with Desmond Tutu, and he's always talking about the concept of the Ubuntu, right? The concept of the Ubuntu, that I am because we are. And I think it's very important for us, all of us, and that's why it's important to have this programming and all the work that you are doing, Karen, to really push people to have empathy and to be compassionate and to recognize that we should be doing this work not only because it's morally the right thing to do, but on the practical grounds, because as the refugee crisis has proven, for example, is that when you ignore atrocities going on far away, the implications, you often feel them even in your own home, in your own country. So we have not only moral reasons, but also practical responsibility to try to get to a level where the basic human rights of all people is recognized.
How are the best ways for people to become educated about this? Are there any kind of curriculums for children that talk about these issues, also human rights?
Yes, I think that it's the first thing that we all need to do is to be aware, to make ourselves aware.
Definitely.
Yes, and it's very important to have, whenever I go to classroom, I go to a lot of classrooms in high schools and middle schools and universities. And one of the things that I always tell young people, the students there, is you have to recognize that, see yourself not only as a US citizen or wherever the country where I'm speaking, but you have to see yourself as a global citizen with a global responsibility. So you have to make sure that you are aware of what goes on as much as possible, what goes on around the world. And fortunately, in this day and age, that's not a difficult thing to do. I mean, with the technology, social media, we are aware. If we make the choice to be aware, we will be aware. And then once you're aware, you have to make a decision about what you're going to do about the injustice that they are aware of. So with the Genocide Survivors Foundation, we do have workshops where we go to schools and community events and churches and synagogues and try to bring genocide prevention education and human rights education to different audiences. And in the long term, we are trying to work on a curriculum, written curriculum that we can hopefully use to, in schools and in communities of faith. But I know that there are a number of genocide already. There are a number of Holocaust and human rights education curriculums. And one of the things that I always say, even within, the school curriculum, whenever I go to these high school and middle schools, you'd be surprised how many young people are actually exposed to genocide prevention or human rights education in schools. I feel like genocide prevention and human rights education should be mandated. Every school. Because yes, it's one thing to teach our young people about math and science. It's very important, but it's also important to teach them about compassion and empathy, and to teach them about their responsibility as a global citizens to speak out whenever they hear of people being persecuted because of who they are, because of what they believe. So I think education is key. That's why the work that I do. And I truly believe, based on my experience doing this work almost 20 years ago now, because I started in 2001, I do believe that when, there are more people who are trying to do good, and when people become aware, they recognize again the importance of being involved, both not only as doing it because the right thing to do, but because it has to be done on practical grounds, that people will act. So part of our work, and I know you are obviously part of this work, is spreading that knowledge and trying to get as many people to join us, because at the end of the day, it's, as I always say, it's going to take the efforts of each and every one of us. I mean,
I would love to help do something here in California for you. So you can reach out to me after the show, and we'll connect and see if there, I am a kindness and compassion educator and have been for 18 years in the schools. So I would love to help any way I can. So, and maybe you could tell other people how they can reach out to you that are watching the show. And if there are people who are watching right now, you can type into the chat, even just let people know if you have a question for Jacqueline. She can come back in after the replays and see your messages, so you can type right in where you are and how you'd like to help, because this is our question we ask all the time: what can we do together that we cannot do on our own? And that's why as I hear you speaking, my mind just starts running around, and I start thinking about all the ways that I can share this in our community, and how important this is. What an important work that you're doing, Jacqueline. And I just want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for being who you are in the world after such atrocities that you saw. What an incredible, incredible strength you are.
One of the things that I think can be very powerful, and I want to find out your thoughts on this, the idea of truth and reconciliation between groups that have had a historic or a history of conflict. And and of course, one of the examples was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. But then there are other examples as well. And one of the programs that we are proposing, that the world is proposing, is something called Truth and Reconciliation Hearings, which is different from the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which are more legally oriented. Truth and Reconciliation Hearings are more like public events where representatives of both sides of traditionally conflicted groups have a public airing of what is meant for them, each of them, and then kind of a public reconciliation. So anyway, I'm just wondering what you think of that idea and the general idea of truth and reconciliation experiences in countries, and what and if you can also talk about what has kind of bring us up to date with what's been going on in Rwanda since 1994. Would you say that reconciliation has happened, or is there more work to be done? What's the current situation there?
First, I guess beginning with what you were saying, Karen. First of all, I would certainly love to come to California and work with you. Thank you for the work that you are doing. I mean, I read quite a bit about your own story and the work that you do, and it's critically important. Kindness, compassion, empathy, these are the type of things that people have to realize. We have to realize how important that is, because when you don't have an empathy and you're indifferent to suffering, it's, again, I feel like it chips a bit of humanity. You know, humanity is about having compassion, about being kind, and being empathetic, having empathy, or being sympathetic, or having empathy. Because at the end of the day, it's important to always realize that it could be us in this difficult situation, experiencing the suffering that is being experienced by our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world. So that empathy and that recognition of, again, of our common humanity and interconnectedness is critically important to this necessary transformation of moving from where we are to where we need to be to a more equitable and peaceful world. And it's very important. I also wanted to say something about what you said earlier, Rick, about you working with Immaculate and not knowing her own story for years until you asked her about her accent. So, like,
I know, it's amazing, right?
The importance of reaching out. You know, whenever I speak to people, especially young people, when I go to classroom and I see the diversity in classroom, I always say, you know, who are your friends? How much of an effort are you making to reach out to people who look differently from you, people who worship, you know, differently from you? So the importance of recognizing that we all have our stories, and the only our own stories, and the only way we're going to hear it is if we actually reach out and ask. And when you hear people's stories, you realize, again, more and more of our shared humanity. You recognize that irrespective of who you are or your age or where you come from, we all have the same basic needs. You know, it's those needs are no boundaries in terms of geographical boundaries or racial boundaries, and just having that recognition. And I think that we recognize that by reaching out and getting out of our comfort zone. So the importance of reaching out to people who speak differently, who have those accents, who, you know, going to different churches. I think it's very important for our own growth and recognition that, again, we have more in common than we are different. In terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the Truth and Reconciliation hearings that you are trying to do with the world, I'm certainly well aware of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that took place in South Africa after the apartheid, and we actually had a similar proceedings in Rwanda after the genocide, which were known as the Gacaca hearings. These were hearings really where Hutus and Tutsis were brought in the same space. This happened in every village in Rwanda. So perpetrators, victims, and bystanders will be brought in the same space to talk about what had happened, what they had witnessed, what they had seen during those 100 days of genocide. And I think that what came out of that, I mean, it was very difficult.
Was it a similar procedure to South Africa, where people were given, they were given amnesty for telling the truth? Is that how it was conducted in Rwanda?
So in Rwanda, if for those who were involved in a genocide, who carried out the killings, if they confess about what they had done, their sentences, if they were in jail, in prison, their sentences were dramatically reduced. And if they were not in jail, sometimes they would not even serve time in jail. They would be given community service. So there was a form of punishment component to it, but there was also an encouragement and an incentive to tell the truth about what happened, because when something like that happened, it's very important to have an account exactly of what happened as a form in trying to prevent it from happening again. So the Gacaca trials were certainly very difficult, particularly for survivors who came to them and they had to listen to testimonies about what had happened to their families, because literally the perpetrators will come and they will tell you how they killed your mother and how they raped your sister, and where they, sometimes if you were lucky, they would tell you where they had dumped their bodies, and that was good for the survivors who found out, because they were able to find the remains and bury those remains with dignity. That's one of the most difficult thing for survivors, not even knowing what happened. They know that their families died or murdered, but they don't know where it happened and when it happened. So there's always
for closure.
There's no closure, because when you have a tombstone, you at least know, this is where I can go and remember my mother. This is where I can go and remember my father or my sister. But when you don't have that tombstone, it's very difficult. For me, my entire family their bodies were thrown in a river. They were taken by a riverside, killed, and their bodies thrown in the river. So I don't have a tombstone to go to.
God.
So I don't even know. I know they were killed, but I don't know where they were killed. So that is difficult in itself. So these Gacaca hearings or proceedings, one of the most positive things that came out of it was the truth about what had happened, and also the identification of the whereabouts of some of the victims, which provided a form of closure to the victims. So I believe that these, in aftermath of genocide or other mass atrocity crimes, this is something that is critically important, because again, in order to prevent something, you have to understand it. And it's important for the people who were involved in different capacities. Again, the victims, the perpetrators, the bystanders who did not directly participate, but they witnessed what happened. It's important for them to come together and talk about what happened, particularly in Rwanda, in a country like Rwanda, where the three ethnic groups still have to live in the same space, in the same country. Because as you know, Hutus and Tutsis and Twa still live in the same space, in the same villages. So when you go to a village in Rwanda, you see survivors living next door to people who killed their families.
So would you say that the Truth and Reconciliation hearings in Rwanda achieved what everyone wanted to achieve, or was it partially successful and more has to be done in that area? How would you express it?
No, I mean, I think there's certainly some positive things that came out of it. Again, the truth about what happened in the genocide, survivors being able to locate the whereabouts of some of the remains of their family members. I think it contributed to restoring the social fabric that had been destroyed by the genocide. Because again, at the end of the day, it's very important that people have a conversation about what happened, because this is not something that you can easily forget, right? You don't get up and every day and forget that you are an orphan and that your family was, murdered by your neighbors who you still have to live with. So having that conversation and beginning to understand what happened, why people did what they did, it's critical for being able to coexist and move forward. That said, specifically when you look at the Gacaca trials, myself and others believe that there were different number of ways that it could have been improved. For example, you had a lot of survivors who became very much traumatized by going to these proceedings and hearing about what had happened to their family members, the torture, the physical torture, the mental torture. And then these survivors will go back to their homes, their destroyed homes, and they really had no type of mental health counseling, no type of mental health support. So for example, one of the things that we feel should have been very important was to have some kind of mental health support and counseling for the people who participated, who went and listened to these horrific stories about their family members, having that mental health and support component. For example, there was also a significant number of what we call revenge killings. So when people testified against a particular person about what he had done, sometimes they would be killed by their family members.
Oh my God, wow.
Making sure that there are some kind of security measures to make sure that people who come forward with the truth are protected. I mean, because some of them, again, it meant actually being murdered. We had many type of several murders that arose from people who were courageous enough to
Wow.
find
So,
so having security measures, having mental health support, I think these are some of the ways that the hearings could have.
So in other words, more resources would have been welcomed. In other words, right, like resources for security,
Yes.
for mental health support,
Yes.
and
trauma treatments.
right,
yes, trauma
and
treatment.
also maybe continuing, or I don't know. It's I'm just wondering if the lessons that are needed, and especially it's not clear to me that things are totally resolved in Rwanda at the moment. I mean, how would you express that? I've heard some. I don't follow it that much, and I'd like to know more about what's happening in even the neighboring places in Burundi and other places. Is it still kind of a simmering issue, or how would you explain it?
Yes, so it's been 25 years, as you know, since the genocide. And I have to say that Rwanda has come a long way in rebuilding, economically, politically, socially. It's actually amazing to see some of the positive statistics that are always cited about Rwanda, because in 1994, we have to realize not only was over 1 million people murdered in 100 days by their neighbors, the country itself physically was destroyed. The country was in ashes because the people who carried out the genocide, as they fled to neighboring DRC and other countries, they made sure to destroy the infrastructure. They destroyed schools, they destroyed hospitals. They wanted anybody who survived, who came back to Rwanda, to see nothing. So Rwanda was in ashes, and there are some stories that were printed actually in newspapers like New York Times that really portrayed Rwanda as a hopeless country. They didn't know whether the country would survive, what would happen. The stories were very glim. There was no hope at that point. So to see 25 years later that Rwanda is now a country where, people, it's one of the main tourist destination for Americans as well as Europeans. It's fairly safe and secure. So when you go to Rwanda, you can walk down the street. People always say the capital city of Kigali is one of the safest cities in the world, that you can be walking around midnight, 1 a.m., and you are safe. And part of that is that the new government, the post-genocide government, has done a lot in terms of providing security, making sure that people feel safe. So there's been a lot of progress, but as you can imagine, there are also challenges, because one of the things that I always say when I speak about genocide, the crime of genocide, is that it's not something that happens overnight. People don't wake up one day and they say, I'm going to kill my neighbor because he's a Tutsi or because he's Jewish. This is something that arises out of decades of teaching hatred, decades of state-sanctioned discrimination, decades of in the case of Rwanda, of anti-Tutsi propaganda, where Hutu children in schools were taught that Tutsis are foreigners who did not deserve the same rights as Hutus. I mean, this is a kind of things that we hear even today. Tutsis were portrayed as the other, as foreigners, as invaders, and ultimately, when the genocide, in the months leading up to the genocide, they were portrayed as cockroaches, not as human beings, but as cockroaches that needed to be exterminated.
And the media was very much involved with that as well, which is a scary thing for me in the United States and other parts of the world, because the media is such a powerful kind of, the messages of the media become the fabric of our culture. Right. And so if you have media that is being used and manipulated by people for certain political reasons, to create hatred against a certain group. I know that that was a big factor in the Rwandan genocide.
Certainly, the media played a key role in spreading the genocide. I mean, whether it was in a newspaper portraying Tutsis as a sickness, as cockroaches, and when the genocide happened, people actually come on the radio, which was the main outlet, media outlet in Rwanda, and talk about there are Tutsis who are hiding at this school, there are Tutsis who are hiding in this church. I mean, churches became sites of mass murdered. So, or mass murders. So media played a significant role in a month leading up to the genocide, in the planning of the genocide, and certainly in the execution of genocide. That's why, for me, when I see some of the things that I've been seeing in the media in this country, really portraying certain people, even immigrants, the type of hate crimes against immigrants is xenophobia that have risen because people feel that you can call people from, you can say that people are invading this country, that you can characterize people like Mexicans as invaders or animals. Like that kind of language, dehumanizing language, is very, very dangerous. And whenever we hear it, whether it's on our TV or social media, on radio, we need to call and we need to speak up that this is not okay, because that type of dehumanization that leads to genocide. So, but back to what I was saying about Rwanda 25 years later, people have to recognize that the genocide didn't arise in a vacuum. It didn't happen overnight. So genocide, making sure that it doesn't happen again, is going to always be a work in progress. So there is security in Rwanda, but there's still people who still have the same type of ideology that Tutsis are foreigners, that Tutsis don't deserve to live, that they are invaders. So there's a constant, especially in post-genocide environments, there's a constant, we have to constantly be vigilant and to speak out. And when people, we learn about, once in a while, even in Rwanda, you hear about teachers who are teaching the same type of ideology that was taught before the genocide. So the need to be vigilant, to remain, to monitor what goes on. And in terms of Rwanda now, the government has been trying to create or cultivate this larger identity of, yes, of people being Hutus and Tutsis and Twas, but of our shared Rwandan identity. Recognizing that we are Hutus and Tutsis and Twas, but we're also Rwandans who live in the same country, whose destiny, as I said, is tied to one another, which goes back to what we were saying earlier, even going larger beyond Rwandans, of our common humanity. That when a genocide happens in any country, it's that takes away, that shapes our own humanity. So the importance of really trying to find a way where we can all peacefully coexist. There's no reason that should not be the case. There are enough resources to go around.
Exactly, and it's so good to hear that there has been so much progress there.
Yes, there have been a lot of progress, and thanks to the leadership that we've had, because leadership is also key. When you have leaders who use ethnicity or any type of differences as a way to control and monopolize power, that's how genocide happens. But when you have a leadership that's dedicated to peaceful coexistence of all its citizens, that's when you have peace and security. So the importance of really trying to support leaders that really sees that larger of identity of us as human beings, in the case of Rwanda, as Rwanda, is very important. And to see diversity, one of the things I always say when I speak is, diversity, and this is something that was taught to me by the Holocaust survivor who inspired my own activism. One of my favorite sayings of his, he used to say that diversity is not adversity. That diversity is something that should be seen as an asset, something that is an asset for human beings. So being of a different color, of a different religion, should not be seen as something that should be problematic or that should lead to divisionism or violence. It should be seen as an asset. Right. It is an asset, and until we look at it as such, then unfortunately we're going to continue to have this type of injustices and violence.
Exactly. So how can people support your efforts? Connect with you and support what you and the Genocide Survivors Foundation is doing.
Yes, so we have a website. It's genocidesurvivorsfoundation.org. So you can go to genocidesurvivorsfoundation.org and see, learn more about the work that we do in preventing genocide, but also supporting survivors, because I think supporting survivors and victims of these tragedies is a critical part of prevention. So you can learn more on our website. Certainly, I have a profile on Facebook and Twitter as well, so you can find me there. And of course, they can find me through you. So thank you very much. And I'm always, excited about meeting new people and having more people join us in this critically important work that all of us are trying to do. Certainly, you are trying to do.
Exactly. And, I always say, if you're concerned about what's happening in the media, then be the media yourself. And that's what Karen decided as mindful media mom. She said, I'm tired of what I'm hearing in the media. I'm going to be the media. And that's what I'm saying. And that's what we're all doing now with this 11 Days of Global Unity TeleSummit. And I think it's so important. So thank you, Jacqueline Murekatete.
Thank you for having me. And I really love that concept of mindfulness media. It's so important. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Karen and Rick, and thank you for this summit. It's so important.
Oh, yes.
Grateful for you.
All of us. So we can't give up. We have to keep doing our part and getting more people on board to help us.
Yes, we're so grateful for you too. And thank you, everybody. Remember, you can like our page on Facebook and you'll get notifications when we are live. All you have to do is go to facebook.com/the We Campaign or twitter.com/the We Campaign, and you'll get all the information. We'd love for you to join our family.
And also on we.net, you can join the We team and become a We the World We Campaign coordinator, and you can sign up your organization. You can post your organization's upcoming events and announcements on the Global Unity calendar, which is a free public international calendar that is synchronized with multiple other organizations. And we really appreciate your being part of the 11 Days of Global Unity TeleSummit. And I guess our final quote that Karen loves to hear me say, Jonathan Granoff said this at the launch of the We campaign and we.net. He said, I hope we expands so much that there is no longer any them.
That's the kind of world we want to live in. Thanks, everybody. Have a great time, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.